She walked into the lobby with a kind of quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, but it should have. At 48 years old, Vanessa Clayborne had built an empire, brick by brick, floor by floor. The Oakmark Grand Hotel wasn't just another 5-star property. It was the crown jewel of her 17-location portfolio. Yet that night, standing beneath the glittering chandelier and polished marble floors, she wasn't greeted like the visionary who owned it all. Instead, she was stopped. No reservation, no room. Guests only. The words slid out carelessly, as if they were routine. But routine has a way of exposing deeper truths. What they didn't see, what they didn't expect, was that Vanessa was no ordinary guest. She wasn't asking for luxury. She wasn't seeking recognition. All she wanted was a key, a quiet room, and a night to reset before one of the most important board meetings of her career. But Baez doesn't pause for business. The staff looked at her and saw what they wanted to see. Not power, not ownership, just someone who didn't belong. What happened next would not only shatter their assumptions, it would send shockwaves through the entire hotel and leave everyone watching with a story they'd never forget. Because when you underestimate someone who's built everything from the ground up, you're about to learn. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join us here at Hidden Black Stories, where we uncover the powerful, untold narratives of resilience, dignity, and truth every week. We share stories that the world needs to hear, stories that challenge assumptions and remind us of the strength it takes to stand tall in the face of injustice. Now, let's step back for a moment. To understand the weight of what happened in that hotel lobby, you have to understand who Vanessa Clayborne really is. Vanessa wasn't born into wealth or privilege. She was raised in St. Paul, Minnesota. The daughter of a postal worker and a school teacher who worked long hours just to keep food on the table. She grew up watching her parents stretch every dollar, and from a young age, she understood that if she wanted more, she would have to carve out her own path. Her journey wasn't glamorous. Her first job was answering phones at a budget motel off the interstate, where guests barely noticed her, and her managers constantly underestimated her. She wore stiff uniforms that never quite fit and endured endless comments that made her feel small. Some called her sweetheart or honey when they didn't bother to learn her name. Others assumed she was the janitor or a trainee. She worked double shifts, often walking home in cheap flats that left her feet blistered. Determined to build a future where no one could box her in. That determination carried her far. Vanessa studied at night, earned her business degree, and later her MBA. Every step of the way, she fought uphill, battles, closed doors, dismissive glances, and the unspoken belief that a young black woman didn't belong in boardrooms, but she kept showing up, kept proving them wrong. By the time she was in her early 30s, she wasn't just working in hospitality, she was shaping it. She learned every detail of hotel management, from housekeeping operations to financial strategy, and turned that knowledge into opportunity. At 33, she pitched her first big project, the Oakmark Grand in Des Moines, Iowa. Banks doubted her, investors dismissed her, and one even told her, luxury is not a business for people like you. But Vanessa pushed through, negotiating brutal loan terms, sacrificing comfort, and pouring every ounce of herself into the vision. When the hotel finally opened, it wasn't just a building. It was proof that she belonged. Proof that her name meant something. And over the next 15 years, she expanded that proof across the country. 17 hotels, hundreds of employees, and a reputation for excellence. By the time she turned 48, Vanessa Clayborne wasn't just successful. She was a symbol of perseverance. She had made it, but she had never forgotten where she started. And that humility often defined how she moved through the world. Unlike many executives, she didn't crave attention. She didn't travel with assistants or security. She preferred to arrive quietly, often in understated clothing, blending into the background when she could. That's exactly how she arrived at the Oakmark Grand on this particular night. She had flown in on short notice, planning to attend a board meeting in person instead of dialing in remotely. She wasn't looking for celebration or recognition. She carried a simple duffel bag over her shoulder, wore tailored slacks and a soft silk blouse in muted blue, and slipped on comfortable loafers instead of designer heels. She walked into her hotel not as the CEO of a multi-million-dollar enterprise, but as a woman looking for a quiet place to reset before a long day ahead. But that's the thing about humiliate. Can be mistaken for invisibility. And invisibility is dangerous when layered with bias. The lobby sparkled with polished marble, gold accents, and soft light from the chandelier above. Guests lounged in deep leather chairs, sipping cocktails and scrolling on their phones. A couple in matching golf polos whispered to each other near the fireplace. Everything about the space radiated luxury that Vanessa herself had envisioned years earlier. But when she approached the front desk, none of that mattered. Behind the counter sat a young receptionist. She looked up with a smile that didn't reach her. Ista kind of smile meant for someone you're about to dismiss. Her nails tapped against the keyboard as she pretended to search for a reservation that Vanessa already knew existed. And when she finally looked up, her words cut sharper than she realized. I don't see your name in the system. We're full tonight. Guests only. She didn't recognize her. She didn't bother to ask questions. She didn't consider that. Maybe, just maybe, the woman standing before her was more than she appeared, Vanessa could have argued. She could have flashed her ID, pulled up proof on her phone, or demanded to see a manager right away. But she didn't. Because Vanessa understood something that the receptionist did not. Assumptions have a way of revealing themselves, and when they do, they carry consequences. This was only the beginning. The moment the receptionist dismissed her, the stage was set for something far bigger than a missing reservation. What was about to unfold wasn't just about a room in a hotel. It was about the cost of bias, the weight of invisibility, and the lesson that appearances can be fatally deceiving. The receptionist's words still hung in the air when another guest walked up to the counter. Without hesitation, the receptionist shifted her attention, offering a warm, polished smile that hadn't been spared for Vanessa. Welcome back, Mr. Thompson. Always a pleasure. Let me get your key ready. Vanessa stepped aside, observing the seamless exchange. It wasn't the absence of a reservation that stung it. Was the difference in tone? The assumption of belonging given freely to one man and withheld from her without question. She had seen it before. The silent calculus of who is worthy and who is not. When the guest walked away, Vanessa calmly stepped back up to the desk. I believe there's been a mistake, she said softly. Could you check again, under Clayborne? The receptionist sighed, as if patience was a resource she couldn't afford. Her fingers moved lazily across the keyboard. As I said, we're fully booked. We can recommend a hotel across town more in line with your situation. That pausement. Sting wasn't lost on Vanessa. More in line with your situation. She kept her face neutral, but inside, old memories began to stir. Memories of being followed through department stores as a teenager. Memories of being ignored at job interviews despite her qualifications. Memories of investors looking past her to the white men standing beside her, assuming they were the brains behind the plan. Just as Vanessa was deciding her next move, the receptionist's voice grew sharper. Ma'am, if you don't have a reservation, you can't stand here holding up the line. She motioned toward a security guard stationed near the lobby entrance. The guard approached, his presence adding weight to the air. Is there a problem here? He asked, his eyes already fixed on Vanessa, not the receptionist. He didn't bother to question whether she was in the right. Assumptions had already been made. I'm waiting to check in, Vanessa replied evenly. Her voice was steady, calm, almost disarmingly so. The guard glanced at the receptionist, who gave a little shrug as though to say, See? I told you. With that silent exchange, a decision was made. Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to leave the premises if you don't comply. Around the lobby, heads began to turn. Guests whispered in hushed tones, some craning their necks to see what was happening. To them, it was just another uncomfortable scene one they'd watch unfold before retreating back into their own worlds. But to Vanessa, it was a familiar play with a script she had read too many times. Still, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't wave her phone to show her ownership documents or reveal her position. Instead, she quietly reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and dialed a single number. Her voice, barely above a whisper, carried through the receiver. It's Vanessa! I'm at the ground. Could you send someone down? Please. That was it. No explanation. No protest. Just a simple request. As she slipped the phone back into her bag, the receptionist smirked, mistaking Vanessa's composure for defeat. The god stood a little taller, as if bracing for resistance. But Vanessa simply stepped aside, choosing a plush chair in the corner of the lobby. She sat down with perfect poise, folded her hands neatly in her lap, and waited. The minutes ticked by, heavy and deliberate. Conversations around the lobby quieted, the tension radiating outward like ripples in water. Guests who had witnessed the exchange leaned toward one another, their whispers sharper now. Words like embarrassing, unfair, and ridiculous floated through the air. Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief moment. She thought of her parents, who had told her as a child, "There'll be times when people will try to make you feel small. Don't let them! Remember who you are." Tonight, that lesson mattered more than ever. Her stillness wasn't weakness, it was power restrained. Because she knew that the real storm was already on its way. And when it arrived, it wouldn't just correct the mistake, it would expose it. The tension in the lobby was thick enough to slice through. The receptionist continued her work, pretending not to notice Vanessa seated calmly in the corner, though her stiff posture betrayed her unease. The security guard lingered nearby, arms crossed, scanning the room like he had something to prove. To them, the situation was resolved. They had contained a problem, but Vanessa knew better. 10 minutes later, the glass doors of the Oakmar Grand swung open, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. A man in a tailored suit strode inside, his pace quick, his eyes sharp. This was Richard Harlan, the regional vice president for Oakmark Properties and one of Vanessa's most loyal He was followed closely by two senior managers from the hotel's corporate office. The moment they stepped into the lobby, whispers surged like electricity. Richard didn't waste time. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Vanessa, seated elegantly with her legs crossed, calm as ever. His face lit up with both recognition and alarm. He rushed to her side, extending his hand. "Ms. Clayborne," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the marble lobby. "I am so sorry for the delay. We came as soon as you called." The receptionist froze. Her eyes flickered from Richard to Vanessa, confusion clouding her expression. The security guard shifted uncomfortably, realizing too late that the script had flipped. Richard turned toward the front desk, his jaw tight. "Can you explain to me," he said, voice measured but firm, "why the CEO and owner of this hotel was denied entry into her own property?" The words hit like a thunderclap. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Guests craned their necks, eyes wide, murmuring among themselves. "Owner! CEO!" The receptionist's face drained of color, and the security guard dropped his arms from his chest, suddenly small in the shadow of what had just been revealed. Vanessa rose from her chair with deliberate grace. She didn't need to shout or point fingers. Her presence alone was enough. She walked slowly back toward the desk, each step echoing across the marble floor like a drumbeat. When she reached the counter, she placed her hands gently on the polished surface and looked directly at the receptionist. "I asked for nothing but a room," she said softly, her voice steady, calm, and devastating in its composure. "A room in a hotel that I built, that I financed, that bears my signature in every detail. And you looked at me and saw nothing." The receptionist stammered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't know, ma'am." "I didn't realize," Vanessa cut her off with a gentle shake of her head. "That's the problem. You didn't realize because you didn't look. You didn't listen. You didn't even consider the possibility that I belonged here. And that assumption, those invisible judgments, cost you the chance to do your job with dignity." Her words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The quiet clarity in her tone carried more weight than rage ever could. The entire lobby hung on her every syllable. Richard stepped forward, his expression severe, effective immediately. "This will be escalated to corporate HR. There will be a full investigation, disciplinary actions, and mandatory retraining for every employee in this hotel. Bias conscious or unconscious has no place here." The staff stood frozen, unable to meet Vanessa's eyes. Even the guests seemed stunned into silence, many of them reflecting on the uncomfortable truth they had just witnessed. Vanessa didn't gloat. She didn't revel in their humiliation. Instead, she turned toward the guests, her gaze sweeping across the lobby. "This," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "is why we must hold ourselves accountable. Success means nothing if we allow others to be treated as invisible. I will not tolerate it, and my hotel's not for me, and not for anyone who walks through these doors." The room erupted in quiet applause, not loud, not rowdy, but steady and heartfelt. Guests nodded, some murmuring words of agreement. The staff shifted uncomfortably, realizing the lesson was not just for them, but for everyone watching. Vanessa returned her attention to the receptionist. Her expression softened, though her words remained firm. "This is not about punishing you. It's about teaching you. And I hope tonight is a lesson you never forget." With that, she accepted the key Richard had retrieved, thanked him with a nod, and walked toward the elevator. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The weight of what had just happened would linger long after the doors closed behind her. In that moment, Vanessa Clayborne had done more than reclaim her dignity. She had turned a moment of erasure into a public reckoning. And for everyone who witnessed it, the memory would remain. A reminder that assumptions carry consequences, and quiet strength can bring even the proudest to their knees. The next morning, the Oakmark Grand buzzed with unease. What had unfolded the night before spread quickly, whispers among guests, hushed conversations in the staff lounge, emails flying through corporate offices. By sunrise, the story wasn't just contained to the marble floors of one hotel lobby. It had become an internal reckoning across Vanessa's entire company. At 9 a.m., Vanessa walked into the executive conference room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off polished oak tables where department heads and managers sat stiffly, their eyes darting nervously toward her. No one quite knew what to expect. Would she come down hard? Would there be immediate firings? Or worse, would she quietly let the incident slide, leaving them to wonder what message that silence would send? She took a seat at the head of the table, setting down a coffee and a slim folder of notes. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence pressed heavy, making the managers shift in their seats. Finally, she spoke. "What happened last night?" she began. Her tone, calm but resolute, was not just about me. It was about what happens when we stop seeing people as people, when we make assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't. She looked around the table, letting the weight of her words land. Bias, whether subtle or glaring, destroys trust. It diminishes dignity. And if it exists in this hotel, then it exists in all of ours. That cannot continue. She opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. Effective immediately, we will launch a company-wide training program focused on recognizing and addressing bias in all its forms. This isn't a punishment. This is a reset. Every single employee, from front desk to senior management, will go through it. A murmur rippled through the room, but Vanessa held up a hand. And let me be clear. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for awareness. I'm asking for the willingness to pause, to question your assumptions, and to treat every person with the respect they deserve. She paused, her gaze softening. I know what it's like to start at the bottom, to wear the ill-fitting uniform, to feel invisible. I've been that receptionist. I've been the one others ignored. And I promised myself that if I ever had the power to change that experience for someone else, I would. The room fell silent. For the first time. The managers weren't just looking at their CEO. They were seeing the woman who had fought her way through the very trenches they now oversaw. Later that afternoon, Vanessa walked back into the lobby. The receptionist from the night before Kayla was at her station. Her eyes were redrimmed, the weight of embarrassment still fresh. When she saw Vanessa, she straightened, fumbling, as though unsure whether to speak. Vanessa approached slowly. She didn't tower over her. She didn't scold. She simply placed a folded note on the counter. I believe this is yours, she said gently. Kayla's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was her own handwriting, a hastily scribbled apology she had slipped under Vanessa's door that morning. I'm deeply sorry for my actions last night. I judged you unfairly. I promise to do better. Vanessa gave a small nod. Apology accepted. Now, prove it with how you treat the next person who stands here. Kayla's eyes welled up, but she nodded, understanding that this was her chance to grow, not just to regret. That evening, alone in her suite, Vanessa sat by the window, looking out over the city lights. She thought of her parents, of the long road from a budget motel desk to owning 17 hotels. She thought of the countless moments where she had been underestimated, dismissed, or made invisible. And she thought of how, even at the peak of her success, the shadow of bias still tried to erase her. But she also thought of the guests who had applauded in the lobby, of the managers who listened in silence, of Kayla, who had chosen humility over defensiveness. Change didn't happen overnight, but it began with moments like this, uncomfortable, raw, and unforgettable. Vanessa sipped her tea, a small smile tugging at her lips. She hadn't needed to raise her voice or flaunt her title. She had let the truth speak for itself. And in doing so, she'd left an imprint far deeper than any outburst ever could. Because the truth was undeniable. Respect wasn't a luxury to be granted. It was a right. And when denied, it became the most powerful reminder of who truly holds the keys not just to a hotel, but to dignity itself. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of the day settle into quiet resolve. There would be other battles. There always were. But for tonight, she could rest knowing that she had turned humiliation into a lesson, bias into accountability, and silence into a voice that echoed far beyond the marble lobby of the Oakmark Grand. And for anyone watching, anyone listening, her story carried a message impossible to ignore. Never let someone else's blindness define your worth. You don't have to shout to be seen. You just have to know who you are and walk like it every single time. So, what about you? If you were in Vanessa's shoes, would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have spoken out in anger? And more importantly, how will you choose to see the people who cross your path tomorrow? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Hidden Black Stories. Because the fight against invisibility starts with remembering and telling the stories that matter.